importance of connecting new to old, right? Then he says, all things go to decay, and all of a sudden, literature's frivolous. Why do I got to learn Shakespeare? It's dumb anyway. Science is cold. It's just one more stupid science class. Never considering the question, what would happen if we didn't have photosynthesis? That question alone can spark an entire lifetime of curiosity about biology and science. Well, in passage 29, he asks, of course, then, what's to be done, right? He says that in his writing, he says at this point, we've contrasted the church versus the soul. That is to say, religion versus the spiritual would be our language, right? And he says it, God is, not was. And then he finishes in paragraph 29 by saying, it is the office of a true teacher to show us that God is, not was, that he speaketh, not spake. The true Christianity, a faith like Christ's in the infinitude of man, is lost, he says. None believeth in the soul of man, but only in some man or person old and departed. Ah me, no man goeth alone. Now this notion of going alone, we're going to hear more about this in his essay called Self-Reliance, is the idea or the challenge that if you recognize that something is not working for you as an idea or a concept or a formalism or a practice, might even be our view of school, you got to do something about that. You got to challenge yourself, is what he says. Paragraph 30 now, to just finish the essay, he says, don't imitate the saints, rather emulate the saints, sounding very much like what he said in American Scholar in our last conversation. Paragraph 31, he says, be a newborn bard of the Holy Ghost. It's a wonderful line to would-be preachers, teachers, to say, you have to bring energy and enthusiasm when you're going to present ideas, because students are wanting that, they're longing that. And he says, be to others a divine man. In other words, live this, right? Of course, for Socrates, the most clear way he does this, and we talked about this in the Phaedo, in the dialogue called Phaedo, is when you get to the end of your life, what kind of moments do you have at the end of your life? Remember, Socrates' students are all crying, and he's laughing, right? He's having a good time. Why? I'm ready to go on an adventure. Well, yeah, but you're about to drink hemlock and die. What is death? If you believe in energy, you believe in something that cannot be either created or destroyed. That means there is no death. What are we all afraid of? See, that's the Socratic insight. Emerson, of course, very impressed by this, right? And in fact, he will say it in paragraph 31. By trusting your own heart, you shall gain more confidence in other men. If you are a liar, it is hard to believe other people. If you are a cheater, it is hard to believe other people. And yet fundamentally, as we've said before, we know that cheating is wrong when we are placed in a situation. The one you love the most is about to go into surgery. Do you want the one who is going to conduct that surgery to be the physician who cheated her way through medical school, or the one who actually learned the material? If you have a choice, which teacher or which surgeon do you choose? See how that works? Fundamentally, we understand that to do it well is always better than to do it poorly. Now, of course, we can become lazy because the only sin is to forget. That is to say, to forget who and what we really are, what really matters. And of course, when we do forget, then of course, we can kind of fall back into old patterns of behavior. But Emerson is going to argue that that is not fundamentally who you are. You are called to greatness. You are called to be an amazing person. So why not be an amazing person? That's his argument. Well, we'll finish now the essay, paragraph 32. It's a calling. He says teachers should be an influence, not just with their words, but more with their life. Paragraph 33, he says that there are resources in us on which we have not yet drawn. Compelling, right? Then he uses in paragraph 33 a fascinating word picture for a speech given to a bunch of would-be preachers. He talks about Napoleon at Messina. And it was only when the battle started to go against him that Napoleon found his way. We know who we are when the battle goes against us. Think about the fact that Gandhi will quote passages from the Bhagavad Gita to talk about the importance of peace, but the Gita was actually a dialogue constructed and taken on a battlefield. It's a fascinating irony, right? Paragraph 34, we have to rekindle the fire, right? But he says it, I don't want to make a new cult or a new religion. He says, I just want to breathe life into the old forms, right? The emphasis, he says, should be on the soul, the soul, the soul. Anytime I'm asked to talk to teachers about what it is we've got to focus on, I go back to this line from the Divinity School address. The soul, the soul, the soul. Of course, what are we talking about? This, right? That is to say, use this to talk about this. But finally, in the end, we've got to talk about what's most important in our lives, the soul, he says. Finally, in paragraph 35, he says, there are at least two advantages to Christianity. They may sound kind of interesting or funny at first. He says, first of all, the Sabbath day. That's a great idea, to take a day off and to enjoy it, right? And then he says, the institution of preaching or teaching, he says that's really important in our culture as well. That notion of, you got to have somebody who stands up and talks to everybody else, right? And kind of shares ideas. That remains, of course, an important part of our culture still to this day. He says finally in paragraph 36, I look for the new teacher who shall be the mirror of the soul, that is to say, will live this, right? Very Socratic idea. And finally, of course, will help students find joy. I can't help but think of Emerson's pal Wordsworth with that. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. I get happy when I see rainbows, right? He says, he says it, so was it when my life began, so is it now I'm a man, so be it when I shall grow old or let me die. If I ever come to a point where I'm not happy about seeing just seeing rainbows, I hope that I'm just dead. Why? The child is father of the man. And I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. These are lines Emerson knew well. In other words, the challenge of the new teacher is to live so passionately these ideas that students also want to live those ideas, and themselves then, of course, will in turn begin to live those ideas for the next generation. This is the way, Emerson will argue, this is the real, true message of Christianity. Well, let's go to level 2A and messages, themes quickly. Of course, one of these is nature shows us what and who we are if we're willing to see it. Of course, also the teacher must live the life of love, not just talk about it, right? And finally, we only rise to the occasion when things start going bad or difficult for us. Students can become greater students when they are sitting in a class and they don't get on with the teacher well, if they know how to challenge themselves. You are as free as you allow yourself to be, as we've said before. At level 2B, the rhetoric. Well, notice word pictures, right? Especially starting with nature and the ways in which that view of nature, small in nature, that is to say, Ruthie's tree, leads to an amazing insight, right? That can be profound. Note the power of his prose. We've only read a little bit of it, but it's very direct. At one point, he even calls those he's speaking to brothers. He reaches out, he kind of grabs you and brings you in. Now, hey, one of the reasons why I'm doing these essays with you guys is I want you to find them and read them on your own. Read it again, enjoy it, be challenged by his ideas, and appreciate the power of his prose. Finally, he knows he's walking a fine line. So several times he does that thing we call conceding a point. That is to say, he says something to the acrimonious audience, the audience he knows isn't going to agree with him, so that they might at least continue to listen to him, right? At 3A, well, we're going to relate this to other texts and to the world. Obviously, theory of the forms comes to mind, right? Like Socrates. Notice, Socrates was critiquing the spirit of the Athenian people. Emerson is critiquing the religiosity of his day. Notice, I'm going to challenge you to critique the learning environment of the very schools that you are in. Right? Of course, inevitably, some people are going to be offended by this kind of thinking, right? Notice the idea as well at 3A that life is kind of like war, right? We've got the Napoleon reference I mentioned already, the fact that the Gita is a text that is set on the battlefield. What is your favorite text that suggests that that living in this world is kind of like being in a battle, right? Think about, remember Longfellow's Psalm of Life, in this world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. Emerson knew these lines well, right? Finally, at 3B, we're going to relate this to ourselves, I hope. If you are a religious person, how do you respond to this? I think that's an important question for you to ask, right? And if you're not a religious person, how do you respond to this? How can you even learn from an idea or an essay like this without just closing it and saying, well, I don't believe in God and I'm not religious anyway, it doesn't matter? It's that question that I once asked one of my students who came to me and said, well, I don't believe in God anymore. And I said, well, okay. And he said, well, are you going to like say something? And I said, well, I guess I really don't care about that. Do you believe in love? And he said, well, yeah, love is like all I can believe in. And I said, well, you know, the text you were raised on says God is love. If you believe in love, you believe in God. Of course, you believe in love if you believe in the second box, right? And truth and beauty and all of those other things, right? Well, what about school? I really think this is a legitimate question to ask from an essay like this. Do you think that school is dead because teachers don't actually live passion, life of love anymore? The teachers you respect the most are the teachers who have that sense of curiosity. Of course, the teachers who you don't respect maybe lack that, but what right do you have to not respect them? Because is it not true that you at times struggle as well with your own levels of curiosity and wonder? What have you done to make a bad teacher better? That's an interesting question. See, we're at 3B. We got to ask questions like this. How can you aspire to be a great teacher? Oh, I'm definitely never being a teacher. A student told me the other day, I'm a doctor. I am no teacher. They don't get paid for jack. To which my observation was, well, yeah, but what is a doctor if not a teacher? Most of the time, doctors are communicating with patients about what they need to do and what's it going to be like when you have to sit down next to a person and say, you've only got a few more days. I'm sorry. There is nothing else we can do. At that moment, right, you're a teacher. Of course, if you live in this world, you are always teaching the young, right? Just like we said in an Antigone lecture, if you're walking home past the park, you see two big kids beating up on a little kid, are you just going to walk by and say, sucks to be that kid, or are you going to do what you got to do, and you're going to step in and say, knock it off? Of course, when one of those older kids looks at you, obviously one of those kids younger than you, but older than that kid they were beating, and says, make me, or what are you going to do about it? It's at that moment you become the teacher, right? It's at that moment you become the teacher. You can't avoid this fact. In your life, you will be a teacher. What kind of teacher will you be? Will you live this, right? Or will you deny this, and in the process then only live this? And what kind of world is that to live in, where the only thing that matters is how much power and how much sex and how much money you can get? Well, do schools maybe need a rebirth? And I think it's fascinating to ask the ways in which technology is helping that to happen, right? Of course, the final 3B question is, what can you do to improve your school, to improve your community, your town, your city, your country, your world? Any time that young people start to become actively involved in politics, I'm always excited by that. I go back to an essay like this of Emerson's because I think Emerson somewhere is smiling and saying, yes, that is it. That's the whole point. And of course, what Whitman meant when he said in passage 46-47 of Song of Myself, destroy the teacher, move beyond the teacher, see what negative models you have in your life and say, when I'm that age, I will be more. Show respect, but demand of yourself. That's going to be the point, maybe, of this speech. Well, we leave the Divinity School address now, and in our next Harvard Classics lecture, we turn to a text called Man the Reformer, which is another lecture that was read before the Mechanics Apprentices Library Association in Boston, January 25th, 1841. I hope you come back, and let's enjoy being challenged some more. Thank you for hanging with me. I appreciate it.